Hello, Successfuls. Jolene here. Are you ready to find out the key to crafting a gripping narrative for your business? Join Kelly and me as we talk about choosing the hero in your business story as we discuss Donald Millar's Building a Story Brand.
This is the Success Through Community podcast. All right, so in this episode, I am talking to you about a book that I've read multiple times. This is one of those books that I feel like I keep needing to return to. And I think it's one of those things you kind of maybe should return to regularly, because as our businesses shift and pivot and things like that, there are certain things that we need to do beyond just what we sell that, need to shift appropriately as well to make sure we're communicating well with our audience. And the book that I'm talking about is Building a Story Brand by Donald Millar. And it's so okay. So the first time I read it, or to be fair, I listened. This is an audiobook that I did listen to 4 or 5 years ago, back when I was really in the height of running my vocal coaching business. And I did build my story brand for that business, and it made such a difference, because not only in how people responded to me, but I felt like I actually knew how to talk in that moment, which seems like a weird thing, but I knew how to speak correctly to reach the right audience. And I think to a large extent, I kind of forgot when my business completely changed and I started focusing on business mentoring and the technology side of things. I kind of forgot that I needed to do it again because that old story brand was not correct. I mean, who I was talking to then is not at all who I'm talking to now. So, so I've listened to it again, read it again, and all of that. And I'm actually even in the process of doing another new story brand. And ironically, because of the book that I'm going to talk about in the next episode that I'm doing, because it's making me realize that how I view my business impacts or should impact my story brand yet again. So this is why I'm saying, I think this is one of those concepts that it's good to return to regularly to make sure that your story brand is still accurate. So
yes.
Let me explain a little bit what this book is about and what a story brand is. So if you look at it from a very, very high level perspective, it's essentially a marketing tool, right? That's really simplified. But what it's doing is helping you to take the message that you want to give. Is that the right word? The message that you want to portray to your potential customers, to your audience, and crafting a story around it. This is what all commercials do, whether you realize it or not. It's obviously what TV shows and movies and things like that do. But the story brand is more unique in that I feel like often the story that small businesses start out telling is their own story. They're telling the story of how they started their business and why they started their business. I mean, how often have you been asked what your why is in business coaching and whatnot in the past? And the why is super, super important. But the point of story brand is that the story that you should be telling is not so much the story of you and your business. It's the story of your customer, right? You should be telling the story with your customer as the hero, the protagonist of the story. And, you're more of the Obi-Wan Kenobi, if that makes sense. You're the Yoda, you're the guide that comes into the picture to help them achieve their goal in their story. And
yes. So, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, go for it.
I was going to say, it sounds more like you are creating a hero's journey.
Yes.
And your customer is the hero and you are the Yoda. So it's not so much. So from what I understand, and I've read Story Brand many, many years ago. So I'm glad you're bringing it up, because from what I recall, it definitely helps you clarify your message, and everything you see online is always about tell your story. Be a storyteller as an entrepreneur or a solopreneur, and on your social media, tell your story, tell your story. But with the story brand, the difference in this book from every other book that you're going to read about marketing and storytelling as an entrepreneur is that this book encourages you to tell the story of your client and their transformation and how you're going to help them in that transformation.
That's right. And I think, it's not like, nobody else in the marketing world is talking about this, because obviously they are. But I think what's great about this story brand method and the resources that go along with it. So if you're listening to the book or reading the book, Donna will often refer to links and places that you can go to access certain resources. And he has an online tool that actually helps you to develop your story brand. And you can do more than one too. So if, like I did one originally for my old business, and that's still there. I can still see that when I go into build it out for Tech Savvy Academy. And he breaks it down into sections and says like, okay, like here's your hero, here's your customer, and what is it that they most want, and then you write for yourself what they most want. And then, the next one is about like the guide, and, how does the guide you empathize with their struggle and what they want, right? And how are you positioned as somebody who can help them, kind of thing. And then it continues down that track of, guiding towards what benefit they're going to get, what result they're going to get out of working with you or using your product or whatever it might be. And I find this really, really helpful because it helps create this level of clarity in the message. I feel like so many of us, like we know and we feel what we want to portray, but we're not necessarily great at articulating it. We're not writers, and then add to that the fact that a lot of the tools, a lot of the places where we're meant to kind of give a high level picture into that, like limit us on characters. Yes, I'm talking to you, Instagram. Like, stop limiting the bio so freaking short. Because if you're trying to explain, your quote, I help statement, and you're super limited on characters, then you start to have to pull out words that might be very important to the clarity of your message. And I think, this kind of allows you to create that much larger, almost like a paragraph, is what your story brand is. And then you can start to go through and pick and choose like, okay, well, what are the most important key pieces of this? And then you can craft it down into an I help statement or, something like that. But I just think, I think having that in mind, and, it goes along with the concept of, ideal client or client avatar. I mean, there's a million different terms that are used in this kind of way, speaking directly to that one person in your email copy or in your social media captions, or even if you're, a video content creator, speaking directly to a person as opposed to trying to speak to your whole audience at once. I think this kind of story brand is so helpful in making that person more tangible to you as the content creator, so that you know who you're talking to and it doesn't feel like this abstract thing, right? He doesn't talk about naming that person per se. I've heard that technique as like a strategy to help with that. And I do think it's helpful. I don't remember him mentioning that specifically, but I doubt he would be opposed to it, because I think that is a very helpful thing to have that actual person in mind.
So yeah, it comes back down to like that old school way of marketing where you would build a really strong foundation. And that sounds like what this is going to be, that giant paragraph that you're talking about that you have to whittle down to your bio on Instagram is going to be a solid and strong foundation, which makes it a lot easier to kind of pick and choose the pieces you want to put out there when you have that character limitation.
Right.
It sounds like it comes back to that old school way of marketing where you create your ultimate, and we've done this a million times. Well, I know I have, and I know many people who have done it a million times, where you create your avatar. You do give her or him a name.
Right.
You give them a story. You give them backgrounds. You know when their birthday is, how many kids they have, when they got married, what books they read, what they do in their hobbies, so that it's almost like you are constantly speaking to that person only, because that person is, you know, so much about them, and, you know, right down to their internal and philosophical problems and how you can fix them. You can go real deep and be able to have a more clear message that way.
Yeah,
You said it
absolutely.
doesn't really go in deep like that, but you don't think he'd oppose to it. How does it tell you, or if you recall, to find that person? Like, how does it tell you to dig deep if it doesn't tell you to create said person?
Well, I mean, it's talking about like the I don't want to say the higher level because it's still deep, but I mean it's more about crafting the clarity around your message and less about like really designing who the hero is, right? So like for example, it's first off, I think understanding that the hero of the story is not you, because I think that's something that so many business owners wrongly think when they start out in this kind of world. I know I certainly did that billion bajillion years ago. That you think of yourself as the hero because it's like, well, I'm the one coming in and helping you achieve XYZ, so of course I'm the hero, right? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
that seems so intuitive, but when he explains it in this way and then you stop and you look at all the hero's journeys, whether it's the Harry Potter books, and man, we talk about that a lot, or Star Wars, or like anything, you look at these really popular heroes' journeys, and the hero is not the one who knows how to do everything.
True.
Ever.
Right. Yeah. When you think about it.
I mean, realistically, the hero is the underdog, like 9 times out of 10. It's the
Yeah.
person who has the struggles, has the challenges, and is looking for their Dumbledore, their Obi-Wan, their Yoda, their, whoever it might be. They're looking for that person to guide them and give them the answers. And I think, if you look at those stories as well, you realize that that guide, that person that we're supposed to embody, does not actually just give them the answers, right? Truly guides them to finding the answers for themselves. And I think as coaches and mentors like you and I, that is also an important thing for us to remember. I mean, StoryBrand is really about the marketing, but I think it has so many more implications into how you should act, how you should behave in your business. That it's not about, someone coming to me and saying, hey, I'm struggling to stay on top of my time, and me saying, okay, do this, 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 and this.
Right.
That's not
It's
the correct approach. It's me saying, okay, well, what do you think is giving you the most trouble? Like, what do you think is the biggest struggle? Why is that a struggle? Right? It's like basically being a therapist in a way of
there's
guiding the
a lot
person
of
to the
reflection.
answers. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of reflection when you think about it. It's anytime a client comes with an issue, it's putting the mirror up in front of them, and it sounds like this book is teaching you how to do that in the essence when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say it's teaching you how to do that. It's more teaching you that you should do that.
Yeah.
So there's not a ton of I don't really know how to explain it, but it's more like giving that aha moment, if that makes sense. And
Right.
like a complete mindset shift from, because if you go into this book thinking, okay, this is going to help me craft the story where I'm the hero and, I can save everyone and fix all their problems. And then you start reading this book and you're like, wait, I'm not the hero? Wait, what? Like what? I don't know what to do with that. And as you start to understand that and see why you're not the hero, see how your customer is the hero, and then start crafting that story, I think it starts to permeate everything else, where you start to realize like, oh, maybe I shouldn't just tell people what to do because, well, for one reason, like it's not going to work for everyone because everybody needs to do things in different ways. Everybody needs to learn in different ways. And so this concept of just telling somebody what to do is going to be the answer for everyone is false anyway. And so I think it kind of starts to move you in that direction just with that switch of, oh, I'm the guide, not the hero. And I don't know if I really answered your earlier question. Like you asked, like, how does it teach you how to do that if it's not telling you to create that person? I mean, it is telling you to visualize and really see that person. I'm just not sure that he's specifically saying like you should name this person and you should know.
Right.
Like his questions aren't asking about their his questions aren't asking about their total backstory. It's asking about who are they in the context of their struggle, their pain point that you can help them with. Right? We're taking it a step further and saying, hey, we know that there's a lot more that impacts that pain point, you know? So going back to the same example, if their pain point is that they're not great with time management and they always feel like they're overwhelmed and, you know, whatever. Well, if they have 5 kids, that might be a contributing factor, right? I mean, that could be helpful information, but I think that, and you know, it helps in like the niching down of like who your ideal audience is. You know, maybe I specifically want to work with moms who are running a business, or maybe because I'm not a mom, I specifically don't want to target, you know, because so many business coaches and whatnot are moms. And so they do then target other moms because they can relate in that way. Right. So the people who are like me, who are not moms, but are still struggling to manage their time, might feel completely neglected and invisible in that market because nobody's talking to them. But also they might feel like, well, what's wrong with me that, you know, mompreneur over here's got 5 kids and she's figuring it out, but I don't have kids. Why can't I figure it out? Right. Like there's that aspect of it that he doesn't necessarily dive into, but I think complements so well what he is talking about, which is just the concept of crafting that story and then how to use that story to, you know, infuse your copy regardless of where that copy is going.
That makes so much sense. And I think I need to reread the book.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, like I think I think rereading or at least revisiting the concept of this on a regular basis is so helpful, because I even think like what my business looked like when you and I first met, it's already totally different right now. Like I'm still serving like the same basic market, but my approach to it is different, partially because of, you know, books that I've read that have kind of shifted my mindset, shifted my focus, helped me niche down in a different way or whatever it might be, but also just what I'm selling now. You know, I was selling a little bit more kind of piecemeal things before, and now I'm selling more of a holistic approach. And so that changes how I talk to the customers as well. Absolutely. You know? And so I think it's important to just kind of come back to and say, okay, a lot of this might still apply, but how do I need to tweak this now? Even if it's just in the section in the little box that's about me as the guide, you know, maybe that needs to change a little bit.
You know, I compare this a lot to the story of, you know, writing and the hero's journey and how your customer is your hero. Does it touch on anything like that? Like, does it make any kind of correlation to a hero's journey on how?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, oh, it does. Hey, like the whole call to adventure, meet your guides,
100%.
Over roadblocks. Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so focused on storytelling, and he gives so many examples, which I think is really helpful in this kind of situation, because this abstract idea sounds great and everything, but it's sometimes hard to envision, how do I turn this into marketing without it coming off super cheesy? Right. You know, because you're not going to like start out your copy saying, I'm hey hero, let's go on an adventure. You know what I mean? Like how does that
I know some
translate
of us
into real?
might.
I mean, if it's appropriate for your market, absolutely go for it. But I think that, the examples that he gives, and I do not have any of them handy right now, so don't ask me, but like the examples he gives of real businesses and real marketing campaigns that are using this story brand concept to tell their story. And when you stop and you think about it, you're like, okay, obviously they're not like spelling it out for me that I'm the hero and they're the guide and whatever, but I can see how they're positioning us in those roles through this commercial or whatever. And I think,
Right.
and it's, this is an older book, so these are old examples at this point. So, I mean, I'm sure there would be a ton more updated versions of it. That might be a little more helpful, and maybe he'll do some sort of update on it, because honestly, if it gets too far out, some people aren't even going to recognize the campaigns he's talking about. But I mean, I think the examples are just as helpful as the framework that he lays out, because it helps you to see like a real world application of the framework without feeling like you have to just be super on the nose about it, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Keeping it at kind of like a high level, but with so much clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a quote that he says in the book that I think is kind of one of those quotes that, I don't know, you might see it in my newsletter soon, because I think it's a really helpful quote. It's basically, it says, in every line of copy we write, we're either serving the customer's story or descending into confusion. We're either making music or making noise. And that's just it. Like, there's so, like, we talk often. I mean, I'm sure anyone listening has felt this way before. There's so much noise in social media marketing, so much noise. And we're often trying to figure out, well, how do I stand out in that noise? And how do I, be heard and all of those things? I think it really comes down to making sure that every single time we put something out there, we're making sure that what we're writing furthers our customer's story and doesn't confuse the message. It's all about that quality over quantity kind of thing. Like, don't just put something out there because you feel like, oh, I should be putting something out there. I haven't said anything in a week. Make sure that what you're saying is relevant to the story that you're trying to put out there and doesn't confuse your audience into thinking, well, wait, are they about this or about this? Because now they're saying like two different things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so with the book, and you say it's a much older book, and a lot of the examples are kind of, they could be dated right now.
Yeah.
Do you feel that this is an evergreen kind of message that, you keep talking about revisiting the book, but every time you seem to revisit it, it looks like you were revisiting when you had a shift in your business, which we all go through these shifts and these pivots. It's part of being in business. But would you recommend like an annual review or something like that to just kind of revisit your message over the end of the year and planning a year ahead or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, it's not something that I have intentionally done in that way. I've always kind of come back to it when either when there's a big shift or when I'm feeling, I guess, a little uninspired in my message or
Right.
unclear in my message. But I certainly think it would be beneficial to come back to it. It's absolutely an evergreen concept, regardless of whether or not the examples are dated. I mean, the concept of telling the hero story and having your customer as the hero is relevant regardless. I just think that, the benefit of those specific examples of people using this strategy in their marketing campaigns, if they're not updated and they're not recognizable to the person reading it, it might not be as helpful to understand. I mean, it's still helpful because he's drawing the parallels for you between, here's how they use the story brand, whatever. But I think when you remember seeing that commercial, you're like, oh, I remember that commercial. And I remember how it made me feel, and now I understand why it made me feel that way. And I feel like that part of it would be lost if it gets too dated. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds to me like you'd be able to read this book, and even if you weren't looking at it from a marketing standpoint, you might be able to flip a switch on your company and kind of change things on how you're doing things by viewing your company as a whole, as opposed to just like for a single marketing campaign.
Absolutely. He focuses on the marketing aspect of it, but I think it absolutely has bigger implications than that. It has further ripples. But he is focused on the marketing and the message. But I think, it's also important to kind of realize that just about everything we do in our business that is going to relate to customer interaction in any way, shape, or form is a form of marketing, right? There's the digital marketing that's like literally putting it out there in the world, whether it's, emails or social media or whatever it might be. But interactions that you have with an existing customer, existing client is marketing, because they're going to talk about what you did and how you interacted with them with other people, right? That's why word of mouth is so helpful in many businesses, because somebody has done a really good job of sticking with what they were saying in their digital marketing and actually like following through on that in the interaction with the customer. And the exact opposite can happen there too. If the way that you sound in your copy on social media or in your emails is not how you behave once they're your customer, well, that's a big problem, because you're creating such a disconnect, and that kind of creates a lack of trust in that situation, where it's like, well, hey, I'm not so sure that I believe any of your quote commercials at this point, because that's not how you made me feel, or that's not how, so-and-so says you were when you were there, when they were your customer. So I think it's important to realize that, like, yes, he's talking about it specifically in like the message that you're putting out there in like a more of a digital marketing kind of aspect, but really it should be all the way through your customer's journey, from when they first experience you to actually following through and being the guide that you said you were going to be, and helping them work towards that ultimate goal. Now, is it possible that their journey is not going to end with them achieving the result? Absolutely. But a lot of the time that's because something that they're doing, they're either choosing not to listen to your advice, even though they came to you asking for that advice, or, there could be tons of outside situations that cause that result not to be the case. But ultimately the parts that you control is how you interact with that customer and how you treat them, and letting them remain the hero throughout the journey, and not trying to take over that role for them along the way.
That's wonderful. I like that. In the book itself, it talks about creating your story brand, and it guides you through that. Like, they are your guide. You are the hero in this one. It's so great. It's just coming, right? Is there any discussion or any guidance on how to implement this into your company and into your business? Or is it just strictly marketing and you should market it like this?
He doesn't really talk about how it goes beyond, what we were just talking about, how it goes beyond that initial marketing. At least not in this book. I mean, he then towards the end of the book, he guides you towards all the ways that you could like work with him if you wanted to directly get that one-on-one feedback and that sort of thing.
Right.
Although at this point, I'm sure it's work with his team, because he's so huge. I highly doubt most of us could afford to work with him. But he does a lot of like workshops and things like that. He does not talk about how it infuses the rest of your business. I think he's coming from the perspective of your business is already solid, but you're not putting the right message out to let your ideal audience, your ideal clients know that your business is what they're looking for. And so that's really more where his focus is. Like, hey, you're doing all the right things in the actual business once they get in there, but the right people aren't finding you because you're not you're not putting that right message out into the world, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. It comes down to that clarity, which we always, always talk about. And once you find that clarity, things just come together, right?
Exactly.
So there's mention in the book about the framework.
Mhm.
Can you give us a quick rundown of the framework on how building your own story brand would work?
Yeah, I can. I touched on it a little bit earlier, and we'll put a link in the show notes to how you can go and like use this yourself. It's a totally free tool that he offers, but
Right, right.
so it's online, so like it can be with you anywhere. But essentially, it's kind of like a little bit of a digital bulletin board, and he has these different boxes that are basically the different pieces of the framework. So like the first box is all about the character and what is it that they want. And each of these has a little video that goes with it where it's him like talking and giving you a quick little explanation of what you're wanting to do with this particular piece of the framework. So if you don't read the whole book, then you still have some way of knowing what you're doing with this, but I still recommend you read the whole book. But so it's
Okay.
talking about what is it that they want. And then it says this character has a problem. And inside the problem is this part is really detailed, and I really like this. So it's what is the villain? What is the
Okay.
external problem? What is the internal problem? What is the philosophical problem? Right? It breaks this down
Oh,
into like a lot of detail, because I think we often talk about, what is my customer's pain point? Well, that's oversimplifying it, right?
yeah.
I mean, you need to go a little bit deeper into, okay, the villain is the pain point, but then go further than that. What, like in my previous business, as a vocal coach, my character was someone who wanted to audition with confidence, feel really comfortable in that room. So for them, the villain was the actual audition, because it was this kind of like monster of vulnerability and fear and the unknown. So,
Right.
but there's so much more than that. Like externally, what is the problem or the perceived problem that customer has? Well, in this case, it was that the audition panel is judging them. Even though in reality, as someone who's been on one of those panels, multiple of those panels actually, we're not judging you. We want you to be awesome. We want to be done auditioning people. We want it to be you. So it's totally the opposite of what's really happening, but like, it's just not how it feels when you're the one, putting yourself in that
Yeah.
vulnerable position. Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
then like, what is the internal side of that problem? In that case, it was, being afraid, fear of that rejection and self-doubt and all of that. And then philosophically, what is the problem in that situation? Well, that self-worth and value should not be controlled by the outcome of an audition, right? That's a
Yep.
philosophical problem that ideal customer, that ideal client is struggling against. So when you move past that, it's talking about, okay, they need a guide. And this is where, you talk about how you empathize, how you've been through what they've been through, whatever. Here's the authority, and your authority can come in the form of testimonials or your own successes, things like that. You give them a plan, some sort of process, system, agreement that you can provide to them to show them this is how we're going to get you past, we're going to defeat that villain, if you want to put it in those heroes terms. And then you call them to action, meaning, okay, I'm telling you all of this, but now it's your turn to make a move, right? And here's the
Right.
move that I'm asking you to make in this moment, whether that's, schedule a discovery call with me, or click on this link and watch this video, or whatever it might be. This is that moment of saying, okay, I've put myself out there. Now it's your turn, right? And then, taking that action and letting that action do one of two things, right? It can either end in the success or help them avoid the failure. So depending on what it is that they're struggling with, what their fear is, or what their goal is, your plan and your call to action is going to help them do one of the two. And then at the end, it's explaining what is the character's transformation, right? So getting them to that, what do they want that was in the first box. So I think it's really a helpful way. And you write it all in here, and there's room for you to there's like a notepad so you can write a bunch of notes and then turn that into what you actually put in the boxes and stuff. So it's just a super helpful tool. So read the book to understand how to apply it and all of that, but definitely take advantage of this tool because it's super cool. And I love that it's still free. Like, I'm shocked that it's not behind a paywall yet, because it's just such a helpful tool to really guide you through writing that story and figuring out what it is that you're trying to say.
Like I said, I read this book ages ago, and I'm having flashbacks of going through all of this, and it sounds complicated. It really does. But I think once you get down into it, we are all, as humans, storytelling is just our way of doing things. If you look at, just growing up, your grandparents told you stories, and you're telling your kids stories, and there were stories at school, and everything revolves around a story. So I think it sounds complicated when you lay it all on the line like that, but I think in the process of doing it, if I recall, it was quite simple because it just started to flow,
Mm-hmm.
because we are all born storytellers, right? It's like in our DNA. And I think I'm going to be revisiting this and checking out that tool very soon, just to kind of make sure I'm on the same page and my message is clear. I think it's kind of a smart thing everyone should do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really, he doesn't call it a tool to help you niche down, but it really is.
Yeah.
It's really helping you to figure out your specific focus and exactly how you want to help people. And I think it is one of those things where it is a complicated concept, but he does really, the way he breaks it down really does help simplify it. I mean, if you could imagine, a blank page in front of you and saying, okay, write a paragraph of the transformation story for your customers. What? Like, that's overwhelming. That is complicated.
Yeah.
That feels like too much. And so the way he's broken it down and, prompts you throughout really does help to simplify it. And it is one of those things where it does take a little bit of, upfront work. But once
Right.
you've done this upfront work, it totally simplifies like the rest of your year as you're creating your copy, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's worth it, even though it does take a little bit of time. It does take a lot of focus, but he does really simplify it by giving you these prompts and explaining things as he goes. I think it's a really helpful tool in that way.
That is amazing. It sounds like an amazing and effective, structured way to do things, and to make, especially for, someone just starting out, or someone who just has been doing it for a while and doesn't feel like they're getting anywhere. It could be the message. So
Yeah.
I think everybody, yeah, grab that link in the show notes and plug away and see if it makes a difference. We'd love to hear if it has made a difference, if it's helped you in any way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recommend this book because, again, I did it for, gosh, when did it publish? Like, we keep picking really old books, but
I
they
know, but
seem to
because
be
sometimes they're
very good.
classic,
Yeah,
and I don't know,
yeah,
but I will look it up right now.
yeah,
I don't
because
have it in front of me.
it seems to me, the older books have more, oh, I don't want to say classic, because they just seem to have, they're not full of fluff, right? And some of the new books have we as we recognized, and they're full of fluff, and they're just like blog posts thrown together, some of them. And
Yeah.
it's nice to have a book that is, well structured and well
Yeah.
put together, to be able to really get its point across and have its own clear message to help us with ours, right?
Exactly. And it's 2017, by the way, is when it was first
So
published. So it's not like super
it's not
old,
that
but
old. Yeah.
no, but it's getting older and older, right? So as you read it, especially nowadays with, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like I rarely see commercials these days unless they're
Yeah.
between YouTube videos because, I just don't, I watch streaming. I don't really watch a lot of
Yeah.
TV. So, there's just a large possibility that some of these examples might not be familiar to people. But I think he explains it well enough. He draws the parallels well enough. I think you can still see how they're using the story brand. I just feel like for me, there were so many that I was like, oh, I totally remember that commercial or whatever. And so there was like a relatability to me, and it really helped me to know how I would feel being on the receiving end of that message.
I love that. It's funny that you talk about streaming and commercials and stuff because it's one of those things where nowadays a lot of people will come and say, "Hey, did you see that commercial?" And I remember, like, think of Super Bowl, right? The story in the commercials is every commercial has to tell a story. Those Super Bowl commercials are coveted commercials. And
Yep.
everyone, did you see that commercial? I'm always like, yeah, I don't have cable. So no.
Right.
But thanks though. It's about having that clear message, right? Whether it's in a commercial or on your blog post or social media or just in a video, whatever you're doing, it's having that clear intention and that clear message.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's an awesome book. I highly recommend it. We'll link to everything in the show notes,
Yeah.
including that building your framework, your story brand framework tool that he offers, which is mentioned in the book, but we'll just link you directly to it so you can sign up and start using it.
So if you've read this book or plan on reading it, or even just, click the link in the show notes and did the little framework, hop over to our Patreon community in the free community and let us know, did you find clarity? Did it help you? Would you recommend the book? Are you going to buy it? Come on, let us know what's going on.
If you guys want to connect with us on social media, Jolene, do you want to tell them how they can do that?
Sure. You can follow us on Instagram at Success Through Community, or join our free or paid communities over at Patreon, which is patreon.com/STC Productions.
The best way that you can support the podcast is to make sure that you are subscribed wherever you're listening and leave us a review. That's the only way that new people will find and join our community. The Success Through Community podcast is hosted by Kelly Gable and Jolene Mills, and all episodes are solely the opinions of the respective host. Our sound production and editing is done by Kelly Gable, and all visual creative, including our logo, was created by Jolene Mills. The Success Through Community podcast is an STC production.